From a complete room that was 3 times bigger than the library to game-changing mechanics, here's some of the most insane cut content that never made it into Doors. So Roblox Doors has had a very long and quiet development cycle, which has brought a lot of crazy ideas on what could be added to the game. And believe it or not, some of these features would have made Doors a completely different game as we know it today, with the last cut feature being a complete room that was 3 times bigger than the library, which never even made it into the game. So in this video, I'm going to be listing all of these cut features and telling you some fun facts along the way. So I'm gonna start this list off with the drone. Yes, they wanted to add a literal drone to Doors, but let me explain, because this drone actually served a kind of good purpose. The drone was a normal looking drone, which is probably purely a joke item added in development to test flying mechanics and or holding item mechanics, which was used in game to distract entities like the figure and Seek. And the reason I put this in number 1 is because this item is actually making a comeback in the latest archives update, but instead of being found in drawers, it will be obtainable only with the admin panel. The next cut feature is haste. And you might think, but isn't haste in the game? But did you know haste was actually an entity designed for the hotel? In September 2022, haste was a concept for floor 1 because the developers wanted to stop players from hiding in a safe room forever. So if a player took too long to move on, it would spawn and you would need to move to the next room or hide in a closet to avoid haste. This was of course taken over by Dread later on, but the developers eventually cut it from the game as it just didn't fit with a puzzle heavy game like Doors and would be too stressful in the game. And 2 years later in 2024 they reworked haste in the back door because the developers loved the idea of haste and reworked him to only attack if you fail to pull a lever and the timer runs out. Could you imagine constantly needing to keep going because haste will otherwise kill you instantly? The next cut feature is a Venus flytrap. In very early versions of Floor 2 The Mines, the developers wanted to add an entity that would only spawn in nature and overgrown rooms, the Venus flytrap, which was first actually originally found by data miners and was designed to be a static entity which would only spawn in overgrown rooms and looks like a giant Venus flytrap with sharp teeth and a fleshy inside. It would sit completely still and block certain pathways, and if a player came too close or stepped inside of it, then its mouth would shut and would deal damage over time until the player escaped or someone else saved them. But it was eventually cut because the developers thought it was too close to snare and it would make the already pretty grounded floor in Floor 2 even more crowded. And fun fact, the Venus flytrap was actually replaced by the Gloom Bats to still make overgrown areas scary and dangerous. The next cut feature was actually removed 4 days before Doors officially released on Roblox. They were entities called Mobbles, which is a category of entities, but only 2 ever got made. The first Mobble was meant to be a random jumpscare entity which had a chance to randomly jumpscare the players. For example, if you were to hide in a closet, it had a very small chance to be sitting inside the closet and loudly jumpscare the player and push them away, preventing them from hiding in the closet. It also had a small chance to appear behind newly opened doors. This Mobble was not designed to kill or damage, but only to jumpscare the players. And this mob was actually reworked into the entity Jack later on into the game. This feature was cut from Doors because the developers felt like there were too many repetitive entities and jump scares in the game that had the exact same mechanic. So they decided to remove Mobble and made them 2 separate entities instead. So they made the first Mobble Jack, the closet slash jump scare entity, and the second Mobble Ambush, this violent speed demon entity. Honestly, I can't imagine Doors without these entities since Ambush is a really big part of the game and has gotten me killed a lot of times as well. On the topic of entities, the next cut feature is another entity, which is nowadays one of the most known entities in the entirety of Doors. Did you know that the Lookman was originally intended for the hotel, and he was actually named Look? It is the same Lookman as we know it today, a tall creature, and if you look at it, you would take damage, but Lookman was actually scrapped because they wanted to split the concept into multiple characters. The tall and shadowy Look was repurposed to create Halt, while the idea of looking at something and taking damage was put on a new entity, the Eyes. Yes, the eyes were originally Lookman. And fun fact, Elsplas has actually said publicly that he regrets naming the eyes, and actually wanted to name them Stare, because he felt the eyes didn't match the style of doors with entities like Rush and Seek. And actually, he almost changed it right before doors blew up on Roblox, but he decided to keep the name because players had already gotten used to the name. And well, the Lookman also returned in 2024 when the back doors came out, with it being a reworked and upgraded version of the original Lookman in Doors. The next cut feature could have made Doors a completely different game. In very early alpha stages of Doors, the developers heavily experimented on save rooms that would appear every 20 or so doors, which would be a room where no entities could spawn at all, not even Screech. And it would be a brightly lit room with a cozy fireplace and a bed. And the developers actually wanted to add a feature where you could go up to a bed and save the run and leave it for later. And this was eventually scrapped though, because the developers found it would remove the roguelike feel of Doors and the permadeath nature of the game, which if added would completely break the tense feeling after getting to door 90 with good stuff, for example. It would also be very hard for servers to save exact health and items for thousands of players at once. This feature was reworked though into the rooms and the courtyard, where the entities could not spawn in the courtyard, and in the rooms you can exit through this door here. And fun fact, the saving your progress feature didn't fully get scrapped, as you can still save your run for later after you beat the hotel and then continue into the mines. And you can also save your items in a rift for future use. And the final biggest removed feature is the Grand Generator Hub. This massive room was originally designed as the climax room for the mines. To put things into perspective, this room was actually 3 times bigger than the hotel's door 50. It featured giant wind turbines, infinitely long catwalks over deep drops, and a massive power reactor in the middle of it all. This room had the nickname Subfloor Core Room, and instead of just finding revolving wheels and closing them like in the final room 200, you had to explore this giant room and its tunnels to activate water pumps, vent toxic steam, and manually align a power grid to power up an elevator. But this room was notoriously difficult and deemed impossible by developers eventually, because it was designed to be a joint hunting ground for 2 boss entities at the same time. So this room had 2 segments, the upper metal bridges and the lower sewers. So while exploring the upper bridges, the figure would spawn and walk around, and if you fell off, you would instantly get hunted by an early build of what would later become the Queen Grumble. This room was eventually cut because playtesters found the room more exhausting than fun to play, and because you needed to constantly dodge 2 instant death entities, one segment could easily take over 20 minutes. And quite simply, the room was too big for servers to handle, which made the game very laggy. But this idea never got fully scrapped because the 2 segments were split into 2 separate rooms. They moved the anchor puzzle and the giant caves with grumbles to the nest at door 150 and the flooded sewer part to the end of the mines at door 200. And a quick bonus feature, they wanted to add a badge called Thousand of Many, which would only be obtainable if you died 1000 times. But this never made it into the game because quite simply it's almost impossible to get for normal players. I mean, even I have less than 400 deaths after 2 years of playing Doors. And those are some of the biggest cut features from Doors that never made it into the final game. Thanks for listening to me app. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel with notifications on. I'm trying to reach 5,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and also join my Discord server for special hosted events by me personally. Shout out to these random people who did subscribe, and see ya.